بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, tonight bi'idhnillah, we will conclude our series, our mini-series on the women who are promised paradise. And if you had missed out, well, we based it off of the hadith, the authentic hadith, where the Aisha radiallahu anha narrated the words of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam when he said, Nisa'u ahli al-jannati arba'. The women of Jannah are four. And we've spoken so far about Maryam binti Imran alayhi salam, Fatima binti Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam radiyallahu anha, Khadija binti Khuwaylid radiyallahu anha, and we conclude today with Asiya, the wife of Fir'aun. Now, today's lecture in particular may be a little bit shorter than some of the other lectures. First and foremost, because maybe you notice it from my voice, I am a little bit sick and my voice is a little bit croaky. Okay? And number two is actually, we don't actually know that much about Asiya. We don't really know much, but despite this, the fact, just the simple fact that she is mentioned in the hadith as a woman who is promised Jannah makes it all the worthwhile to research her and to study her and to try to find whatever bits and pieces we know about her to try to create a something that we can benefit from. So let's just jump right into it, inshallah. So first and foremost, who exactly is Asiya? Now most scholars of tafsir, including Sheikh Ibn Kathir, along with At-Tabari as well, they refer to her as Asiya binti Muzahim. Asiya binti Muzahim. And with that being mentioned, I purposely want to I know I just started the lecture, I purposely want to press the pause button, pause the lecture for a second, and I want to go on a tangent for a second, okay? Because this topic that I'm about to talk about, it causes a lot of issues and a lot of problems and potentially confusion, especially for Muslims trying to gain a little bit more knowledge about Islam purely by reading books and or maybe listening to lectures. So maybe, okay, you don't have the time to go and pursue an Islamic scholarship, so you just rely on whatever lectures your local masajid provide or online on YouTube or things like this. The primary issue I want to address: how can I trust the information which I am reading in a particular book or hearing from a particular lecture? Okay, this is really important and it ties directly to our topic, topic of Asiya radiallahu anha, and I'll talk about this why. Now, to make it very, very simple, memorize this general rule. If we take our information, whatever information you're reading is found in the Quran or in the authentic Sunnah, which by definition basically means you find it in the book of Sahih al-Bukhari or Sahih Muslim, or you find it in some of the other books of Hadith, and it's been graded by scholars of Hadith as Hasan or Sahih, then for the most part this information is 100% reliable. 100% reliable, and typically it is these sources that our faith bases its foundation upon and extracts principles such as teachings of fiqh, teachings of aqeedah, things which are core to our faith. So now why am I mentioning this? So let's take this name for example, Asiya binti Muzahim, the name Asiya. So what are my sources? How do I know that her name is Asiya? Because if I were to open the Quran, nowhere in the Quran does it mention the name Asiya. It only refers to her as Imra'at Fir'aun, the wife of Fir'aun. However, if I flip open to Sahih al-Bukhari or to Sahih Muslim, I will find authentic hadith which mentions, for example, the hadith narrated by Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, who narrated that the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, كَمُلَ مِنَ الرِّجَالِ كَثِيرٌ. Many men have achieved perfection. وَلَمْ يَكْمُلْ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ إِلَّا مَرْيَمُ بِنْتُ عِمْرَانَ وَآسِيَةُ امْرَأَةُ فِرْعَوْنَ. So he mentions the names explicitly. Out of the men, many men have achieved perfection, but out of the women, only 2 of them have achieved perfection. And he mentions Maryam bint Imran and Asiya, the wife of Fir'aun. So we know for sure, 100%, the wife of Fir'aun, her name is Asiya. Why? Because I find it in a reliable, trusted source found in the authentic Sunnah. But, okay, what about the second half? Binti Muzahim. Now I mentioned, when I gave you guys the name, I mentioned that famous scholars, big scholars of tafsir, people like Ibn Kathir, people like At-Tabari, they refer to her as Asiya binti Muzahim. So here is where we ask, okay, Mr. Shaykh Ibn Kathir, where did you get this information from? How do you know that her name is Asiya binti Muzahim specifically? So we go and see and open the books and read what he says, and you will find that he doesn't have any authentic ahadith referencing the name binti Muzahim, that her father's name was Muzahim. We don't know this, okay? And rather what he says is that this is a report from the Banu Israel, a report from Ahlul Kitab, from the people of the book, commonly referred to as Al-Isra'iliyat. Al-Isra'iliyat. And this is what I wanted to touch upon. Now, what exactly are Al-Isra'iliyat? Their narrations or stories sometimes. You find them typically in books of, books of tafsir, things like this. And the narrations typically sound so appealing. Like you will have some of the most mesmerizing stories and mind-blowing stories you've ever read in your life. To the point where you're like, I really want to go and just sit in front of the public and go and teach this to everybody because of how beautiful this narration is. However, this is the whole point here. The source is not trusted. The source is coming from Ahlul Kitab. Now, how did these narrations come into place in the first place? We're not going to dive into that very deeply, but we know, of course, that the Muslims, especially the Muslims who were living in Medina, they were neighboring the Jewish tribes. And while the Muslims and the Jews, they didn't have a very healthy relationship overall, just looking at the whole seerah. Especially after the death of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and after the death of some of the knowledgeable and the big Sahaba, many of these Jewish people, at some point they accepted Islam. And they converted to Islam and they came to Medina. Now, because maybe they don't know better, they started talking about teachings from their own faith, okay? Started storytelling, okay? And this concept of storytelling was very, very, very widespread in early Islam. Very widespread. Like they would call them al-qassasun. Their jobs were literally, they'd get paid to sit down like this in a chair and tell you some of the most mesmerizing stories that will blow your mind, for the purpose of pulling people close to Allah Azza wa Jal. But this is where the problem is. Some of these storytellers who became very famous and their words became written over generations and generations into some of the bigger books, like the books of tafsir and whatnot, they were relying upon untrusted sources from the Banu Israel. So, the big problem, of course, is that we know, of course, the Quran tells us and teaches us that the Torah and the Injil, the books of the Banu Israel, originally when they were revealed, they were authentic. They were the book of God. They were the book of Allah. But then their followers tampered with them. They distorted them. They hid some things or changed some things in them. So obviously, you can no longer trust such sources anymore unless the Quran tells you something about the Torah or the Injil. In that case, the Quran is telling me this. So I have no problem accepting it. But otherwise, by default, I should be very, very, very cautious. Okay? So, now that being said, what do we do when we encounter a narration that is narrated by, that has a source from the people of the book, by Ahlul Kitab? Do I just take the narration, rip it out of the book, throw it in the garbage? No. The Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam actually taught us how do you deal with these narrations, what do you make out of them? In an authentic hadith, and many different variations of this hadith, the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he says, ما حدثكم أهل الكتاب فلا تصدقوهم ولا تكذبوهم Whatever narrations the people of the book tell you, whatever stories they give you, don't believe them, but also don't reject them. Now, what does that really mean? He continues and he says, وَقُولُوا آمَنَّا بِاللَّهِ وَرُسُلِهِ فَإِنْ كَانَ بَاطِلًا لَمْ تُصَدِّقُوهُ وَإِنْ كَانَ حَقًّا لَمْ تُكَذِّبُوهُ. So the foundation, he's telling you, آمَنَّا بِاللَّهِ وَرُسُلِهِ. Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is the foundation. This is what we turn back towards. So we have three different cases here. Jazakallah khair, I needed that. If I find myself reading a narration from the Banu Israel, which clearly goes against the Quran and the Sunnah, then this is something that I completely reject. And I cannot entertain the possibility of accepting. This is very, very clear. Okay? Second scenario is this narration agrees actually with the Quran and the Sunnah. It agrees with it. In that case, we accept it, but to a certain extent. We accept it, but we say, I'm not going to rely upon that narration to extract aqeedah, to extract principles of Islam, to extract fiqh, things like this. So I say, yes, I can take this narration, I can say it in front of you guys, no problem, even though it's not sourced from Islam, but it agrees with what Islam has to say. Then you have the narrations which are neutral. They neither go against, nor do they agree with. So what do I do with these narrations? In that case, we don't accept it. We don't accept it, but at the very least, we don't reject it. So we just push it on the side and we keep it there. Bas. That's all that is done with this narration. So, to summarize all of this, if none of this made any sense to you, the original question was, how do I trust the information which I read in a certain book or hear from a certain lecture? The answer, whatever is coming from the Quran and the authentic ahadith, accept it, don't worry about anything. You're on the right track, you're getting trusted information. But whatever is coming from other sources, especially from Ahlul Kitab, you have to be extra cautious. Depending on the case, you have to reject it. Or in some cases, you can accept it, but in some cases, you neither accept it nor do you reject it. So, Binti Muzahim, back to Asiya Binti Muzahim. The Binti Muzahim portion is coming from the narration of Banu Israel. Okay? Does it go against Islam? No. Does it agree with Islam? No. It's a neutral narration. So we just say it out there. That the scholars, they called her Asiya Binti Muzahim, and the sources that they use were historical sources from the Banu Israel, and we leave it at that. Okay? And so in this, I just kind of gave you a little bit of a blueprint. You apply the same process that I just gave you an example, Asiya Binti Muzahim. How do you authenticate that? Take that with any narration you read from any book or any information you hear from any lecture, follow that exact same process. And you will guarantee yourself that the information that you're learning and listening is trusted and reliable. You can filter it. So, the reason why I decided to go on a little bit of a tangent is because now from the perspective of the Quran and Sunnah, we actually don't know anything about Asiya, the wife of Fir'aun, other than the simple fact that she was the wife of Fir'aun. And other than the simple fact that she was a believer and that she did not agree with the actions of Fir'aun. And even if you were to look through all of the books of hadith, the authentic books of hadith, you will only find the hadith which I have mentioned to you already. The hadith which I have mentioned about the 4 women who are promised Jannah, and the hadith about only 2 women have perfected their faith. These are the only 2 authentic hadith where the name Asiya is actually mentioned. So today's topic will be limited to whatever is found in the Quran. That's inshallah what is going to be our focus in the in the duration of our lecture, inshallah. So her first mention comes in the Quran in Surah Al-Qasas, which we recited in the first rak'ah. Allah Azza wa Jal, introduces us to Fir'aun and who he is, and his tyranny and his corruption and everything that of course, just in case you are not aware, Fir'aun is presented in the Quran as one of the worst tyrants that humanity has ever witnessed. He is someone whom Allah Azza wa Jal declared, that Fir'aun proclaimed in front of everyone, أَنَا رَبُّكُمُ الْأَعْلَى, that I am, astaghfirullah, something nobody should say, right? This is the worst of the worst in the world. He used to murder children, slaughter the children, and to leave the women. He would enslave the men of the Banu Israel, and he would subject them to some of the most brutal treatment and oppression. He would mock the message of Musa in the future when it would come to him. And he would talk to his close his close men, henchmen. And he would say, Ya Haman, ibni li sarhan la'alli ablughu al-asbab. Oh Haman, build me a set of stairs that I can climb. أسباب السماوات فأطلع إلى إله موسى. So I can climb these stairs after you build them, so I can perhaps look at the God of Musa. And he's saying this, of course, out of mockery. So Fir'aun is presented in many different places in the Quran as being a very horrible tyrant. Now today's topic is not on Fir'aun, rather it is the wife of Fir'aun. So after Allah Azza wa Jal introduces Fir'aun and the oppression and how the infant Musa alayhi salam was born, Allah Azza wa Jal, he says, فَالْتَقَطَهُ آلُ فِرْعَوْنَ لِيَكُونَ لَهُمْ عَدُوًا وَحَزَنًا إِنَّ فِرْعَوْنَ وَهَامَانَ وَجُنُودَهُمَا كَانُوا خَاطِئِينَ. That baby Musa, we know the story in a general sense, that she put him in the Nile River, and then it carried him through the basket to the palace of Fir'aun, and they grabbed him. And because he was a child, and it was during that duration of time when children of Banu Israel were being slaughtered, Musa was also about to be slaughtered. This is where we get the first look at the wife of Fir'aun. And in the next verse, Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَقَالَتِ امْرَأَةُ فِرْعَوْنَ قُرَّةُ عَيْنٍ لِي وَلَكَ. That this baby is a source of joy, is a source of happiness for me and you. Who's she talking to? She's talking to Fir'aun, the tyrant himself. لَا تَقْتُلُوهُ. Don't kill this boy, don't kill this child. عَسَى أَن يَنْفَعَنَا أَوْ نَتَّخِذَهُ وَلَدًا. Let's not kill this boy. Don't kill this boy. Perhaps he may become useful to us, or perhaps we may adopt him as a child, as our own son. And of course, that is exactly what happened. And by the way, just through this one verse, this one verse, even though it just looks like it's telling us a story, but there are so many hidden benefits and wisdoms just from this one verse, subhanAllah. First and foremost, it teaches you that even in the middle of the worst and the most oppressive and the most brutal people and societies that you have ever seen and witnessed in history, Allah always will place in their middle people of Iman. People who will oppose injustice. Even if their names don't become known, even if the world doesn't know about them, Allah will know about them. And Allah purposely plans and sends these people in the midst of these societies. And we see that Asiya, she showed mercy in a place that was infamous for its cruelty. And she also shows wisdom, the way that she's talking to Fir'aun. Now, by the way, the way that she's talking to Fir'aun, yes, Fir'aun is her husband, but her Fir'aun is not a loving husband, okay? He's not a nice person. He's not a person that, if his wife raises his voice on him, that he's going to be like, khalas, let me just go to the room, let me, make some shay and khalas, call it a night. No. He's a horrible person. So even she knows that he might attack her if she says something wrong. So she uses wisdom. And she doesn't come out to him like, this is wrong, don't kill a child. This is a baby, who would kill a baby? This is what are you doing? She doesn't come like that. She knows that doesn't work on Fir'aun. So she goes and addresses Fir'aun in a way that Fir'aun didn't understand. And she says, don't kill him because he might be useful to you later. Don't kill him because he's going to be a source of pleasure to you. So she talks to him through his mindset. She convinces him that you're going to benefit. You're going to be the winner at the end of the day. And so he says, khalas, I'm not going to kill him. So this is wisdom. And it also, by the way, shows us Asiya was not your average woman. She was a very brave woman. Because when you see someone powerful, someone who's oppressing and killing indiscriminately, It's easy to just kind of khalas, put yourself on the side. Let me just shut my mouth. I don't want to get myself in trouble. I don't want to put my life in danger. But Asiya clearly has the courage to walk up to someone like Fir'aun and tell him and speak to him and oppose his decision and challenge his decision with wisdom. So, and by the way, it also shows us that Asiya, her mindset was different from the mindset of Fir'aun from very early on. It's not like Musa alayhi salam grew up and then became a prophet and got the revelation and then came back to Fir'aun and then gave the message and then Asiya heard and she's like, oh my God, this message makes a lot of sense, and then she became a believer. No. It shows us that Musa at this point, she's just a child. He just arrived at the palace of Musa, the palace of Fir'aun. Yet she's already saying, we should not be doing this. What we're doing, this act of killing a child, this is not an act that should be done. So, this is, it gives us an early insight into Asiya radiallahu anha. By the way, on that note, slight footnote over here, that scholars also differ. Should you say radiallahu anha? Should you say alayha salam? Or should you not say anything at all? Long story short, all of them are correct. Because number one, Allah Azza wa Jal honors Imra'at Fir'aun in the Quran. The wife of Fir'aun is honored in the Quran. So when you say alayha salam, you're honoring. Okay, you're honoring someone that Allah has honored also. So there's nothing wrong with saying alayha salam. When you say radiyallahu anha, what are you saying? May Allah be pleased with her. Anything wrong with that? I'm making dua. May Allah be pleased with her. Radiyallahu anha. No problem whatsoever. If you want to say, I'm not convinced, that's also completely fine. Nobody's gonna come and give you a hard time. So, kind of a short tangent over there as well. So this is the first point in the Quran where she is directly referenced. And she's, by the way, only referenced twice in the Quran. Once in Surah Al-Qasas, and another time in Surah Al-Tahrim, where Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, وَضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا امرأة فرعون إذ قالت رب ابن لي عندك بيتا في الجنة ونجني من فرعون وعمله ونجني من القوم الظالمين. This one verse deserves an entire lecture. This one verse deserves an entire lecture just to dissect and go through what just happened in this one verse. The surface level translation. وَضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا. Allah has set an example to the believers through the wife of Fir'aun, who said basically making dua to Allah, "Oh Allah, build me near you a house in Jannah and save me from Fir'aun and from his deeds and save me from the oppressive society." There is so much to be talked about this verse. Just this one dua that she just made. And I'm just going to drop some quick highlights, just not to make it too long, inshallah. First and foremost, the verse begins, وَضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. Allah is setting an example to all of the believers. Not only to the women, not only to women struggling with an abusive husband. Allah is setting that example to me, to you, to our children, to our elders, to all the believers. This is who Asiya is to Allah Azza wa Jal and to us as well. And so she made a dua. How did she begin her dua? She says, Rabbi, Rabbi. This is how she begins the dua. And the scholars of tafsir, they comment on this. And they say, Rabbi is how all the prophets of Allah would call out to Allah. They would always start their dua with Rabbi. And if you can see this, if you can find this in the Quran, Rabbi, inni lima anzalta ilayya min khayrin faqir. Rabbi, inni massani ad-dur, wa anta arhamur rahimin. Rabbi, la tadharni fardan, wa anta khayrul warithin. You can go search the Quran, Rabbi or Rabbana. This is how all of the prophets of Allah would make their dua. So she had, subhanAllah, despite she had nothing to do with prophethood, she was not a prophetess, right? But she had the wisdom and the understanding to know that this is how I should call out to my Creator. through His rububiyyah, because Allah is the one who nurtures, He's the one who owns, and He is the one who is in control in everything. So we should as well use Rabbi in all of our du'as as well. What is she asking her Rabb for? Ibni li indaka baytan fil Jannah. Build me a house in Jannah. Now subhanAllah, it may seem like a very trivial dua, but again, put yourself in the perspective of Asiya. In the middle of oppression, in the middle of tyranny. She's witnessing things in her own eyes that no person should ever see. Children being slaughtered, slaves being oppressed, her husband saying things, doing things, brutal things. Usually, maybe perhaps a person in that situation, oh Allah, destroy these people. Oh Allah, get me out of here. But Asiya, she could have made these du'as. And she does, we're going to mention that in a second. But her first and primary goal is on the ultimate prize. Oh Allah, you see the situation I am in. So build me a house in Jannah. For all of that I'm going through. I'm struggling so much. I'm going through so much. So Allah, build me a house in Jannah. And not just a house in Jannah. Ibni li indaka. Indak. Indak means close to you. I want not just some random house in Jannah. No. I want a house close to you, Allah. She's asking Allah for closeness. And in retrospective, closeness to Allah is worth even more than Jannah. Having the closeness to Allah is a reward that is bigger than the reward of Jannah. And she's saying all of this while living in a place and a position of oppression. رَبِّ ابْنِ لِي عِنْدَكَ بَيْتًا فِي الْجَنَّةِ وَنَجِّنِي مِنْ فِرْعَوْنَ وَعَمَلِهِ. And free me from my oppressive husband. From the deeds of, my husband himself, Fir'aun, and from the deeds of Fir'aun himself. And it's interesting how she doesn't just lump it all into Fir'aun. Oh Allah, save me from the oppressor Fir'aun. Save me from Fir'aun. Now, by definition, you could say that if she were to make the dua and she say, oh Allah, save me from Fir'aun, by definition, you could say that she's asking Allah to be saved from the actions of Fir'aun. But she's clearly distinguishing the individual from the actions and the deeds. Because sometimes actions might be evil, but an individual might not be evil. An individual might be evil, but his actions, in some cases, may not be necessarily evil. But in this case, you have an evil individual with evil actions. So she's seeking refuge in Allah from that evil person, Fir'aun. And she's seeking refuge in Allah from the actions of Fir'aun and the oppression and the disbelief and whatnot. And notice also something. I'm kind of jumping the gun over here because I'm planning to mention some of these things in the lessons towards the end, inshallah. Notice that in her du'as, she's not saying, oh Allah, guide Fir'aun. Oh Allah, fix Fir'aun. Oh Allah, change my husband for the better. What is her dua? She says, oh Allah, save me. Oh Allah, save me. Why? Because our understanding, it's a principle in Islam. Islam never expects a believer to remain in harm. Okay? If you are in a position of being harmed, in a place where you're being harmed, the expectation is that you get yourself out of that harm. And you put in that effort to put yourself out of that harm. Now perhaps if Asiya alayhi salam were to be able to get herself out of a position of harm, maybe her du'as later would have been, oh Allah, guide Fir'aun. After she's already away from the danger and she's khalas, guaranteed her safety. But right now she's not in a safe position. She's under the eyes of Fir'aun and she's surrounded by his oppression. She knows this is not where I want to be. I'm not feeling safe. So, oh Allah, save me. So save yourself first, then worry about guidance for the person who's oppressing. Okay? وَنَجِّنِي مِنْ فِرْعَوْنَ وَعَمَلِهِ وَنَجِّنِي مِنَ الْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ. And free me from this oppressive society. So she recognized that dhulm, oppression, does not only come from a person, Rather, dhulm can also be ascribed to an entire society. Sometimes khalas, the whole society, for the most part, is completely gone. They're completely corrupt, and they're conforming, and they're allowing the dhulm to take place. And so she asked Allah Azza wa Jal to rescue her from the entire culture of dhulm. Now, this is, by the way, all that we know about Asiya alayhi salam. So in terms of her story, that's all that we know. This is all that is mentioned in the Quran, and the hadith I already mentioned them to you. So the Quran does not really explicitly mention what is the physical abuse, or what are the details of the abuse that Asiya herself faced. We don't know the exact details, but the dua itself teaches us that while she was next to the Fir'aun, in the presence of Fir'aun, her life became unbearable with him. Life to Asiya became unbearable in front of Fir'aun, so much so that she decided to raise her hands to Allah Azza wa Jal and to ask Allah Azza wa Jal to save her. Now, as for as I mentioned, the graphic stories, we don't know all of the stories. Maybe you've already have heard some. Whatever stories you have heard, they're all coming from Israeliyat. They're all coming from the sources of Banu Israel. So for example, there's a famous, I don't know if you've heard it or not, the famous story of how did Asiya die? Maybe you've read this in the story of Musa or something like this. And they say that, it's mentioned in different books of tafsir as well, that the Fir'aun, he tied her up with stakes to the ground. He nailed her to the ground, and he exposed her outside to the sun, and whenever something came to shade her, they would make sure to move that shade away to make her suffer for as much as possible, and eventually she passed away. So they describe like a very graphic and a very brutal torturing and punishment. So again, we comment at this and we say, this is coming from a source from the Banu Israel, and therefore I don't trust it. I don't trust it because it's not found in the Quran and or in the Sunnah. So we find ourselves, what do we learn from Asiya in 2025? What are some lessons that we can extract from Asiya and this small amount of information and background that we know about Asiya radiyallahu anha? First and foremost, Allah Azza wa Jal mentions this in the Quran in many different places. He says, وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. What does that mean? Righteousness is an individual responsibility. Meaning, if I'm an oppressive person, if I am not a good Muslim, I'm not a good believer, I'm not praying, just because my family is a really righteous family, my dad is a sheikh, my grandpa is the mufti, my mom has all the books of the Quran memorized and the hadith memorized, and my brothers are all da'is, all they take care of me. No. Fir'aun, the worst tyrant, he didn't know that he was married to a woman of Jannah. And she herself probably she didn't even know that she was a woman of Jannah. But just because she is a woman in Jannah does not mean that Fir'aun is going to get away with his deeds. So this is obvious. And so therefore we reflect upon that as well in our own lives. Title, status, power, family name, all of these things, they will not matter in the eyes of Allah Azza wa Jal on the Day of Judgment. Every person is responsible for his own self. يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. You save yourself. Your dad, mom, uncle, Quran teacher, this person, that person. Nobody's going to save you. You save yourself before anything else. Of the lessons that we learn is that Islam, and this is very sensitive, especially in today's times, but it's important to talk about. Islam condemns any kind of abuse. Abuse in all of its forms is absolutely condemned in Islam. And Allah here, we have Allah quoting the words, word for word. Asiya radiallahu anha, the words she is saying, making her, again, Allah Azza wa Jal says, ضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا. It's an example for me and you to reflect upon. What is she doing? She's saying, Ya Allah, my husband is abusive. My husband is oppressive. She's making a dua to Allah Azza wa Jal. to save her from the oppression of her own husband. So how many cases do we hear about today where women are getting beat up by their husbands, insulted, or cultures that maybe they shame a woman if she dared to even complain and say a single word against her husband. Her husband may be Fir'aun, but you speak up, ya waylik. It's a big shame. Keep your mouth shut. Keep it in the house between you and your husband. We don't care. Just don't la tafdahina. Don't make a scene in front of the society so that we don't embarrass us in front of the community. Subhanallah. It's sad to see, but it exists, and I'm talking about even in our Muslim cultures. Maybe back home, maybe even here. Allahu A'lam. But I'm saying this is an issue that we are still facing as a Muslim ummah today. You know, Fir'aun, the big tyrant, he might have died, but the mentality of Fir'aun has not died. The mentality of Fir'aun still exists in some households. And the oppression of Fir'aun, maybe it's not to that degree, but it is still taking place in some households, being taken out on the spouse. Sometimes it's a husband to a wife, sometimes it's a wife to a husband as well. Even sometimes the wife to a husband. Sometimes against the children. Sometimes vice versa. Sometimes the child himself is the Fir'aun over his own parents. So it's not like we're accusing husbands or wives or a particular person. It's every individual. The mentality is dangerous, but it still exists. And so this is why we say it loud and clear, and we're not ashamed of this. Islam condemns any kind of abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, verbal abuse, financial abuse, any kind of abuse. This is un-Islamic. You will not find a single narration in a hadith or through the seerah or anywhere where you will find the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam raising his hand against his wife because he got in an argument with her, or that he even insulted her or used vulgar language against her. Oh, ya Shaykh, have you not opened Surah An-Nisa, where Allah Azza wa Jalla says, فَعِظُوهُنَّ وَهْجُرُوهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ وَاضْرِبُوهُنَّ, and it says وَاضْرِبُوهُنَّ in Surah An-Nisa. Who are you and what do you know about Surah An-Nisa? What do you know about Surah An-Nisa? This is the issue today. I'm sorry, I didn't make this sound like I'm attacking anybody. But the problem is, this is how people take it. They see a few words in the Quran. They don't even understand Quran. They just take some translations of that they see in the Quran. Oh, this is Quran and Sunnah. Quran and Sunnah mean, ya habibi. Which Quran? Which Sunnah? Where are you coming that is from? Rather, unfortunately, some people, they choose to take these hadith or these verses of the Quran, twist their meaning to their understanding such that they can justify their own abuse. Fear Allah in your families. Fear Allah in your spouses. Fear Allah in your children. Dear youth as well. And not just the youth, in fact, all of us as well. Because many Muslims, we like to sometimes justify our lack of faith sometimes. We sometimes like to justify our laziness. We sometimes like to justify missing our prayers. How? By pointing at our situation. Oh, my family isn't that religious, so sometimes I lose focus as well. My siblings, they're not praying very much, so sometimes, I get lazy too and I don't pray as well. Or, Sheikh, I was going through really tough times. High school was just getting to my head and I have trouble back home and whatnot. You know how society is. Brother, is your situation worse than Asiyah radiallahu anha? Is your situation, do you have a Fir'aun in your home? Worse than that Fir'aun? Is your struggle in school or with your friends or with whatever you're going through worse than the struggle of Asiyah radiallahu anha? Asiyah, she was in a toxic marriage. She was surrounded by kufr. And she was in a society of oppression. And she was living in the palace of the, with a capital T, tyrant. With the worst tyrant in the history of humanity. So if we see that someone can, like Asiyah, can make it to Jannah, then what is stopping you from making it to Jannah? What is your excuse? What is your excuse? If someone like Asiya can be guided by Allah to become among the women promised Jannah, surely you can also find guidance somehow, despite whatever circumstances or situations. And I'm not by any means diminishing the struggle that you're going through. Everybody is suffering in their own way. Everybody is going through their own trials and tribulations. That should never, ever be used as a justification to say that this is why I'm missing my prayers. This is why I'm not a good Muslim. This is this. You'll keep doing this the rest of your life. So, and especially for the youth, because we like to make excuses the most. Realize that at some point, excuses, they stop protecting us. You might think that your excuse is protecting you, or you might fool yourself into thinking you're protecting yourself with your excuse. But at some point, your excuses, they will stop protecting you. And they will start instead holding you back. And realize at the end of the day, when we're questioned by Allah Azza wa Jal, no excuse is going to work. No excuse is going to work. Of the things that we also learn from the backstory of Asiya, we learn that it is permissible to make dua to Allah, to ask Allah to remove you from harm. And many Muslims, they neglect this fact. Or what's even more astonishing than this, sometimes someone might come, maybe a woman might confide to her friend and say, my husband is doing this and that to me, he's beating me, he's insulting me, he's doing this and that. No, don't make him dua, don't say these things. Ask Allah to guide him. Ask Allah to guide him. What should you ask Allah first? Asiya alayhi salam teaches us, oh Allah, save me. Oh Allah, save me. You're in the middle of a toxic relationship, or maybe whatever situation you find yourself in, you're in the middle of harm. Right now, as a pious believer, as a good Muslim, you're expected to get yourself out of that harm. After you're done with that harm, oh, may Allah guide the person who did this harm. May Allah guide the oppressor. Oh Allah, fix our situation. Oh Allah, fix our house. You don't make dua, oh Allah, please fix my husband, as the husband is raising the hand and slapping. Oh Allah, please guide him. Oh Allah, please change him. Allah, I know he's a good person, as the husband is raising his fist. What's going on? And we advise others to say, no, don't make dua like that. Don't make dua like that. Because that is exactly what Asiya alayhi salam, she did. She said, oh Allah, save me. And since we are on the topic of dua, speaking of dua, what is Asiya alayhi salam asking for? She recognizes her struggle. And so she evaluates her struggle. And she says, oh Allah, ibni li indaka baytan fil Jannah. Oh Allah, give me a house in Jannah as close to you as possible. I want to be your neighbor in Jannah, oh Allah. Now this is a very big ask. This is a very big thing to ask for. But that's the whole point here. You're asking Allah. You're not asking me or you. Okay, you're going to come and ask me for something. I might be a little bit, stingy every now and then. Be like, hey bro, khalas man, I helped you the other day too. You're going to come out today or tomorrow. You're asking Allah. Allah is Al-Kareem. Allah is the most generous. And there is no limit to what Allah Azza wa Jalla can give. So therefore, no matter how bad of a Muslim you think you are, no matter how you think that you're lacking or that you're not a very good pious Muslim or whatnot, always have the highest expectations from Allah Azza wa Jalla. Always ask Allah for the highest and the best. Some people may have this, think to themselves that as long as I make it to Jannah, I'm okay. Even if it's the lowest Jannah, as long as I make it to Jannah and I survive and then I don't make it to hellfire, alhamdulillah, I'm cool. Well, it's good, ya akhi, that you're thinking about Jannah. But why don't you ask Allah for Jannatul Firdaus? Oh, but I'm not that good. I'm not that pious. I'm not that this. I'm not very... Why don't you ask anyways? Why don't you ask anyways? Maybe perhaps because of that dua that you made. That's going to raise you to the status. Because your dhann and your thought about Allah is that, oh Allah, you are the most generous. And just like you gave that person, surely you can give me as well. Asiya recognized that fact. And so she asked Allah for something spectacular. Ibni li indaka baytan fil Jannah. So be greedy in your du'as. No holding back when it comes to Allah. Be greedy and ask, and even when you ask for Jannah, ask for the highest level of Jannah. Now lastly, the struggles of Asiya alayhi salam really resonate with us today, especially in light of what's happening around the world. When you take a look at Gaza, or Sudan, or Yemen, or all of these countries, and I mention it, I keep mentioning it, that subhanAllah, it's always, whenever I give a khutbah, like a Jum'ah khutbah or something, and then in the du'as, I start saying, oh Allah, help our brothers in Palestine, help our brothers in Syria, help our brothers in Yemen, help our brothers in Sudan. There's always going to be someone who comes to me after the khutbah and say, Ya Shaykh, you forgot that country. You didn't mention that country, why didn't you mention it? Nobody mentions it, everybody skips over it. That's how sad our ummah is today. It's so sad that we have so many countries that it's so easy to lose count. Oh my bad, I mentioned 12 countries, I forgot that country and this country and that country and that country. La ilaha illallah. Our situation is worth to be cried upon, is worth shedding tears on because of how our situation is. But Asiya can tell us more than anyone else about oppression, because she lived with oppression and she saw all sorts of oppression firsthand. First and foremost, we learn about this. Allah Azza wa Jalla says it in the Quran, وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ اللَّهَ غَافِلًا عَمَّا يَعْمَلُ الظَّالِمُونَ. Don't think that Allah is unaware about the oppression that is taking place. Just because oppression exists does not mean that Allah Azza wa Jalla is absent, or that Allah Azza wa Jalla is unaware. And in fact, Allah Azza wa Jalla even mentions this in the Quran, and perhaps this is a lesson for us today. That as soon as baby Musa arrives at the palace, how does the verse go? The wife of Fir'aun, she says, قُرَّةُ عَيْنٍ لِي وَلَكَ, let's keep him, perhaps he'll be used to you or something like that. What does Allah Azza wa Jalla say at the end? عَسَىٰ أَن يَنفَعَنَا أَوْ نَتَّخِذَهُ وَلَدًا وَهُمْ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ. And they had no clue that Allah was also plotting and planning. Fir'aun had his ultimate plan, but Allah had already planned everything. The plan was already set in motion way before Musa, way before Asiya, way before everything. Allah has already said it, but nobody feels it. And nobody knows the plan of Allah Azza wa Jal. So yes, the people of Gaza, they're suffering a lot. They're enduring and they're going through something that we today in Calgary, we cannot even begin to imagine. But perhaps, just like Allah Azza wa Jal chose to make someone like Asiya an example to all of the believers until the day of judgment, perhaps as we speak, Allah Azza wa Jal is making an example of the people of Gaza for all of the believers as well. Now this does not mean that we accept their suffering, or that we say that, Allah desires, astaghfirullah, like Allah desires for their suffering. No, oppression is oppression. Oppression is dhulm. And Allah says, إِنِّي حَرَّمْتُ الظُّلْمَ عَلَى نَفْسِي. Allah does not do dhulm. But it means that Allah might be honoring them through their steadfastness, and not through, through their struggles and their situation. And Asiya, in the middle of the oppression that she is witnessing also, she teaches us, what does it exactly mean to have sabr in light of oppression? What does it really mean to have sabr? Because sabr does not necessarily mean to just sit down quietly and accept injustice and just say, Allah will fix it all. That is not what sabr is. That is not the sabr, at least, that Asiya showed. Sabr means resistance, first of all. There is a resistance. You're going through something that you don't agree with. You're witnessing something, or you're put in a situation where maybe it's physically or mentally or spiritually, whatever, you recognize this situation is wrong. I don't agree with it. So there has to be that element of resistance to resist that injustice, while also, number two, holding firmly to the truth, not losing sight of your faith. not slowing down the practicing of your faith, or not developing doubts in your faith as a result of some injustice that your brain cannot comprehend. And number 3, without becoming the oppressor yourself. Because sometimes, and again, someone might be thinking like, okay, why would someone become the oppressor? Because sometimes to save yourself the suffering, you become the bully yourself. Sometimes you get so tired of getting bullied that you become the bully yourself so that people don't bully you. That's how someone who's oppressed becomes the oppressor himself. So the essence of sabr comes in resisting injustice, holding firmly to the truth, and not becoming the oppressor. So Asiya, she's sitting in the palace of Fir'aun. She didn't simply sit down silently. She didn't just say like, oh, I guess I can't do much. I'm just, I'll just stay quiet and save myself. No, she acted. And when baby Musa arrives, she says, she spoke up. And she says, you should not kill this baby. And in her privacy, she makes dua for Allah to save her from Fir'aun and his deeds. Now, that all being said as well, we as Muslims in the West, we also have a role to play as well. Our job here as Muslims in Calgary, our job isn't just to come here in the masjid and just name drop people of Gaza and name drop people of Sudan and just talk to them here in like a lecture and mention sabr and define them and judge their sabr and whatnot. No. We are spectators. We're not involved directly, physically in the conflict, but you're a spectator. And Allah is going to question your role as a spectator as well. When the people of Gaza, I wonder on the day of judgment, when the people of Gaza, all of them, they gather and they see the Muslims of Calgary, what will they tell Allah? Will they point at us? Be like, Ya Allah, those people, they didn't do anything. They stayed silent. They thought it wasn't their problem. They didn't even bother making dua. What will you have to say to Allah Azza wa Jal? What did you do? Where was the dua? Was the dua made? Was any kind of help sent? Were you educating the people around you, Muslims or non-Muslims, inside or outside the masjid? Were you educating the people about what was happening in Gaza and, and all of these things? Take yourself into account before Allah takes you into account. And perhaps one of the most powerful lessons as well, and especially we say this in a time where social media has caused us to become so apathetic, so emotionless. How? Because the news of bombings and killings have become a daily thing. And at some point, for the majority of us, and may Allah forgive us, maybe we read it on the first day, October 7th, and we were horrified. How come this would happen? How dare they do something like this? Right? And you make dua, Allah, help our brothers in Palestine. You read the news, you're following the news. Second day, you're doing the same thing. First week, you're doing the same thing. First month, maybe, okay. Second month, you're starting to get bored. It's the same thing every day, right? Building got bombed, masjid got bombed, people got killed. It's just the same news to you. And let's be real, we're all guilty of this. I myself, I know I'm guilty of this. Where sometimes I just scroll in social media and it just gives me a post about, a video in Palestine, and I just scroll past it. Because that's how social media has made us become. This is what the modern day society has made us become. Apathetic, emotionless, even though, as if genocide has become a normal thing in today's society. Like, adi, it's just another news. Oh, it's just the news of Gaza. Okay, yeah, we already know that's happening. Let me just go and skip over it. If we are skipping over it, and we are just counting it as a daily thing, and we're not batting an eye about it, and we're to the point where, subhanAllah, may Allah forgive us, it's almost that sometimes we even forget that this is all happening. The story of Asiya alayhi salam teaches us that wallahi, those who are oppressed are not forgotten. They are never, ever forgotten. Even if people like myself, people like me and you, we tend to forget them, they are not forgotten. At least, at the very least, they are not forgotten with Allah Azza wa Jal. Even if the entire world turns away, even if we mindlessly scroll past them, Allah has not forgotten them. Because Asiya alayhi salam is just one woman. We don't even know, like, we didn't even know her name until the Rasul ﷺ told us her name over 1,000 years later. She doesn't have any power. She's not in a position of power. She's under the oppression of Fir'aun. Who cares about what she says? Allah cared about what she said. And even though today the words of Fir'aun maybe become have forgotten, and Fir'aun, who thought himself to be even mightier than Allah Azza wa Jal, astaghfirullah al-azim, Allah Azza wa Jal diminished him. And about Asiya, who thought that maybe she was just a poor and a weak woman who didn't have any ability to change the situation for herself, Allah preserved her legacy and preserved her words, word for word, exactly the words what she said, from the time that the Quran got revealed until the last day, the day of judgment. And the biggest testimony of this is our gathering here right now. Do you think Asiya could have imagined that in the middle of her oppression, in the middle of her dua, she's thinking that probably a couple thousand years later, they're going to be having a lecture in IISC in the Northeast. You know, all the shabab and all the women, they're going to be gathered here together, and they're going to be discussing me, and they're going to be discussing. This is something unthinkable. It's unimaginable. But that is how Allah Azza wa Jal honors. So don't think that the people of Gaza are forgotten, or the people of Sudan and all the oppressed around the world. They are not forgotten, even if me or you, we have forgotten about them. And this leads me to the last and the final point, which I will conclude with bi'idhnillah. And this point actually applies to both personal oppression along with global oppression as well. And that is, sometimes it's a hard pill to swallow. And that is, victory is not always immediate. Victory does not always come right away. And victory does not always come in the way that your mind pictures it. Asiya, her definition of victory was, O Allah, ibni li indaka baytan fil Jannah. That is what she perceived as victory. She didn't say, Oh Allah, overthrow Fir'aun. Oh Allah, cause Fir'aun and his people to be destroyed. Now that doesn't mean that that's not allowed to make dua against the oppressor, but it's the point. I'm trying to make a point here. She understands that the situation that she's in is temporary. The tyranny, the oppression, the killing, the brutality, it's all temporary. Whereas the reward of Allah Azza wa Jal is infinite. So the point I'm trying to make here, sometimes our minds, we try to imagine what does the victory in Palestine look like. And sometimes we try to imagine this picture of the beautiful, Masjid al-Aqsa or Qubbat al-Sakhra, and clouds and sunshine and rainbow, and then the Muslims are entering into Al-Aqsa from one side wearing their abayas, and the shabab are entering from the other side wearing their thawbs and a smile on their face and their takbir, Allahu Akbar. It's a beautiful picture, isn't it? And may Allah make it that way. But sometimes victory does not take that form. Sometimes the victory of Allah comes in different ways. Maybe perhaps Allah has something even greater than what you and I are even imagining lined up for them. But it also might take time. You're making dua right now. A lot of dua. All of us, for the people of Gaza and for the people who are oppressed. And may Allah be with them and may Allah help them and make them victorious against their oppressors. But the answers of my dua and your dua may not come today. Do you think the people of Gaza are not making dua? They're making dua. More than me and you. A father who's seeing his family killed, or a mother who has seen her children blown away. You think she's not making dua against the oppressors? They are making dua against the oppressors. But does not the hadith tell us that the dua of the mazloom, there is no barrier between him and Allah? The one who is oppressed, when they make dua, their dua, there is no barrier between them and Allah, meaning Allah shall accept their dua. But how come? What's happening today? Why is it anything changing? That's the lesson that we're learning here. Victory does not always come immediately. Asiya is making the dua right now. Probably Musa is still a little kid, still a baby. Or maybe towards the end of her life, Allahu A'lam. But Musa was still not in the picture. And she did not imagine how would Fir'aun be destroyed. How would Fir'aun be overthrown? How would the Banu Israel be freed? And how would justice go back in the land? Her mind couldn't picture that. But that's not up to me and you to think about or imagine. Your job is to make dua. Allah shall make that into a reality. When? Allahu A'lam. Could be today, could be 100 years from now. Asiya never lived to see the response of her dua. Asiya never lived to see the fruits of her dua. So we might live to see what does victory mean when it comes to Palestine and Gaza. But that doesn't matter. How victory will come down is something we're all curious about, but not something that Allah will question you for. Rather, what Allah will ask you is, what did you do about it? So, in conclusion, Asiya radiallahu anha, she won against Fir'aun. She didn't win by surviving Fir'aun, rather she won by choosing Allah. And any believer, and this should be a message to us, any believer who chooses Allah, even if they look like they are the weakest of the weakest in today's world, they are the true winners. Choosing Allah is the true victory, even if the world does not see that just yet. So, we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to grant us the tawfiq to uphold the legacy of Asiya. And we ask Allah to grant us the wisdom and the guidance to act upon the lessons and the benefits that we extract from the life of Asiya. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to protect us from ever being oppressed or from ever being the oppressor to anyone throughout our lifetime. And we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to side with the oppressed, with our oppressed brothers and sisters all over the world, in Gaza, in Sudan, in Yemen, in Kashmir, in China, in all of the different places. And again, please forgive me if I don't say a country name. It's my shortcoming, but we have a lot to work on as an ummah. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to accept our effort from us and to accept this effort that we have made to deliver this mini-series about the women who are promised Jannah. We ask Allah to grant us sincerity in every single word that we have said and in every action that we continue to do. And we ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to forgive us and to forgive me if I said or I did or I mentioned anything inappropriate or something that is wrong. That is from me and from the shaitan. And whatever beneficial came out, that is from Allah and Allah only. Jazakumullahu khairan. And I'll conclude here. And again, I apologize for my throat. Subhanallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.